Okay, I asked you to watch a video. Can anyone comment on what topic that video concentrated? Hybrid model. Why do we care about hybrid modeling?
We can use hybrid models essentially to help mitigate the downsides of specific model types. So like you could basically have a stock and flow model with the ease of characteristic changes of the agent-based models and such.
Yeah. Okay. So we can play to the strengths of different methods for representing certain types of issues. Give me some issues that might motivate the use of agent-based models, for example. What sort of phenomena might motivate that to select an agent-based model? Anyone? Presence of what sort of structures in the world? And what sort of phenomena might we find agent-based modeling really favorable for characterizing? Yes, Katie.
Interagent connections and relationships.
Good. Interagent connections and relationships. Excellent. Agent interactions in general, if we know quite a bit about how people sort of interact, or we posit how they interact, we can capture that. But not only that, we can capture things like network structures. What's another motivation for agent-based modeling? By the way, these are good things to make note of. Yes, that's
Viewing history of individuals.
awesome. I didn't think anyone would come up with that, so I was planning to mention that at the end. It was in my mind. That's exactly right. We can follow history of individuals. Can we do that in an aggregate model? What can we follow the history of in a what do we get out, I should say, out of an aggregate model? Overall picture over time. But we can't really probe, and not in a general way, certainly. Is this individual is infected now? So is this person is one of the 100 in the infected, in the count of infectives right now? Is this the same person who was there a year ago? We don't really have a way of doing that. In an individual-based level, we do have ways of characterizing. What's something else we might capture through an agent-based model that's very convenient? Well, aspects of what I would term nested context. Caden spoke about sort of relational connections, but there's also sort of nesting of context, like myself and my family, in the context of a neighborhood, in the context of a city. Capturing that in an agent-based model is very natural. We actually put agents inside each other, and you can find in my example models, I should really post one, like a hierarchical one where the people and cities and the overall environment. And that's very, very natural mirroring and mimics aspects of the world that we know are hierarchical in that sort of way. And it's very natural for characterizing phenomena. But I don't want to privilege agent-based modeling. It's just individual-based modeling gives you those affordances, those capabilities. What are some motivations for using an aggregate stock flow model? Well, maybe I'll ask a little bit more general than that. How about using a stock flow model? What sort of things might that be really well suited to? Anyone? What sort of things? Anyone? Yes, Justin.
Very large population.
Very large population. Continuous quantities, certainly, right? If you have a reservoir that could hold cholera, and you're dealing with like a emergency response following an earthquake or something, and you've potentially polluted water supplies, and you're concerned about contamination because of poor sanitation for camps set up that are just sheltering people without homes, and there's pollution. I mean, it doesn't make sense to characterize that as a as a set, the water supply is a stock of a set of individuals, right? If you have money, in an account, right? That might be another thing. There may be quantities that are so big in number, maybe it's doses of vaccine, that it doesn't make sense, nor is it particularly insightful to characterize them in an individual based model. They're a commodity. They're just some group of things. We treat them as continuous, but there are genuine continuous quantities within our body, our level of immune memory, for example, or the level of a certain blood sugar in my system, or what have you. There's a lot of physiological level effects, and even within the context of an organization, there may be some things with accounts, or some factors like a stock of bugs for a software development project, undiscovered bugs, discovered bugs, that you could track in an individual level in theory, but it doesn't really add much insight at the level you're analyzing this. What other things motivate a sort of stock flow representation beyond those? The ability to characterize what? Anyone? Yeah, systems where there's sort of not a lot of locality and influence. So maybe across a company or something that's tight knit, or across a software development project that's quite tight knit. Stock flow models, often can crisply express certain types of feedback structures that maybe provide us the level of analysis we're seeking in our case. And we're not yet ready to go down to a lower level. Okay, discrete event modeling. What things just shine for capturing in a discrete event model? Resources and the impact of resources on queues and progress of entities along structured workflows, right? How long they're waiting, how long the waiting list is, how long it takes them to go from when they come in to when they leave, or some milestone to another milestone, right? How many people can be seen per day by the clinic or something like that? How many cars can be built per day in in a automotive assembly plant or whatever. Here is discrete event simulation. Is it an individual based tradition or an aggregate tradition? Individual based, yeah. And as such, it's quite compatible, as I hope you learned from the video, with agent based modeling. It's just agent based modeling tends to be less so discrete event simulation tends to be focused very much on this issue of progress along workflows of entities whose primary impact on each other is what? Keeping each other waiting commonly because a resource is not available. If you're dealing with richer interactions like Caden had in mind, maybe it's one person infecting another, one person persuading of another an idea, or engaged in imitative behavior of another. You really want something that in general is a bit less privileging to sort of structured workflows. And even for something like a hospital, I've heard colleagues like Jeff McDonald comment as a physician. And once you're dealing with the hospital, rules are flexible enough that trying to characterize it all with as a structured workflow tends to break down, because you get exceptions to the rules, and people placed in every unit except the labor unit, the unit where actually births are taking place, or the psychiatric unit. you get people placed, so there may be a surgical patient, but they get placed in the so-called internal medicine wards or vice versa. People get placed in hallways, people get, specific treatment according to their needs. They may get things normally given in the ICU, but in the wards because of limited space in the ICU. And so the whole issue of kind of structured workflows works really, really well in more constrained situations, but at some point it starts to break down. So why build hybrid models of these? Why not just decide up front what you want and adhere to that? Personally, I think, as someone who's applied hybrid methods for close to a quarter century, a key motivation is that modeling is learning. And often our discoveries, when we learn from the model, point us to a different approach for characterizing certain phenomena in the model. Maybe at first we start with an aggregate stock flow model, and then we discover evidence that the assumptions about contacts are particularly key. And we want the option of expanding that to a network representation. Or we discover there's real bottlenecks from talking to people associated with, getting care. And we want to expand it to a discrete event model because our stakeholders are pushing us to examine the impacts of resourcing, how many resources we need. So often in hybrid modeling, one of the foremost benefits beyond playing to the strength of each approach, that's kind of part of it, is changing the boundary between the different approaches as you learn. Models grow, but they often, what technique you want for different models will change as you learn. But there's other motivations. Yeah, you discover new needs for stakeholder interests. They really want a geographic component of this, or they really want a visualization of the internal characterization of the facility. Performance. Why performance? How did those issues of hybrid modeling bear on performance? Yes, Babs.
Like for example, agent-based modeling is very computationally intensive. So for instance, if you have like a mix of agent-based modeling for like an at-risk population,
That's right,
SD, then save a lot of power in terms of computation. And it's just like that specific part that you really care about. You can look at an individual level.
That's right. So you can, instead of characterizing, and instead of having one size fits all, where the entire population is characterized one way, you may confine your really expensive part of your modeling to a subset of the population and use maybe an aggregate model for the rest, right? Recognizing that you can bud off people as individuals at a certain point. Jenna's going to use that strategy, for example, and it's a very powerful, practical, pragmatic strategy. In any logic, it's the support for it is imperfect, to say the least, but it is something you can employ and quite readily, and it way pays itself back in terms of performance in many models. Okay, so there's a little bit about a hybrid model, but I don't want to regurgitate all that. The whole video. I hope from that video you carried away some understanding of common patterns, whether it's ABM with DES, or whether it's SD within an agent, or SD producing agent, budding them off, etc. You should be familiar with these types of arrangements. Sometimes you have agents driving system dynamics. Maybe you have agents just for the tobacco companies that are driving smoking promotion in the population, and that affects people's likelihood of taking up smoking. Okay. But I wanted to hit on something else today. So I'm gonna